Good afternoon. I'm Ron Berkman. I'm the president of Cleveland State University. This is the Levin College of Urban Affairs that we find ourselves in. The Levin College has had for a long time a mission and indeed a passion for trying to understand Cleveland, trying to understand metropolitan America, trying to weave a role for the university in the urban tapestry. So I'm delighted to just make a few comments today and introduce our speaker. In 1992, I don't know whether Bruce remembers this, in 1992, I was the Dean of Urban Affairs at CUNY, and the Chancellor at the time at CUNY lent me to the Dinkins administration for 1 year. This was the first year that David was elected mayor of New York City. And he convened an urban summit in partnership with the League of Cities and in partnership with the Conference of Mayors. That itself was an exercise in regionalism, by the way, a coalition of the Conference of Mayors, the League of Cities, and this group of mayors that had come together. They invited every mayor, I think I remember, all mayors of cities of over 250,000 to attend the Urban Summit in New York, a 2-day urban summit. I believe at the time, I may be close to the number, that there were about 40 cities that met this criteria. 38 mayors came to New York to attend the Urban Summit. And out of that, and in combine with that, we put together a group of academics who were working with this consortium that spun off to be the Urban University Consortium. And we published a book after it in 1993, which was funded by the 20th Century Fund and published by Brookings, called the 1992 Urban Summit. William Julius Wilson, Francis Fox Piven, Richard Nathan, I had an article in it. And these were all original articles that were written on thematics directly related to the summit. So the summit was about what we're here again today doing. The summit was about trying to remind, awaken, establish a population that nations are made of great cities. And nations that continue to prosper are nations that pay attention to cities and understand, as as the mayor of Louisville said during the Urban Summit, that you have to be a suburb of somewhere. So the dialogue was resulted in the mayors putting together a collective statement about the needs of urban America, about the growth of urban America, about the vitality of urban America, and really a lot about the connectivity of urban America. So the other person who goes even back before 1992, who's been having this dialogue, is Bruce Katz. And he has really been a one-man force of nature in terms of trying to continue to call our collective interest back to the issue of our cities. And in the latest book, he does a fantastic job of weaving a narrative, which obviously demonstrates that not every city is at the same cycle at the same time, or or ever will be. So I'm grateful to Bruce. Again, it's been, I think, as much evangelism, if I may use the term, as it has been incredible scholarship, or evangelism fueled by scholarship. There's an anomaly, evangelism fueled by scholarship. So the most recent book is The Metropolitan Revolution. It is there in the back. It'll have a section that'll make you warm and fuzzy about Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, excuse me, not Cleveland, about Northeast Ohio. And it is a fascinating look at a really interesting, diverse set of cities. So today's forum also kicks off a partnership between the City Club and Cleveland State University. What we've tried to do at Cleveland State University is really to foster as many partnerships as we possibly can. And that's for an institution like Cleveland State and for a city like Cleveland, this practice of partnerships, this practice of reciprocity, this practice of learning that goes on, this practice of unity. So just as one example, we have on this campus now an international baccalaureate K through 5 school. That is a Cleveland Municipal School District school, not a charter school. A school that selects students by lottery, a school that is the only school right now in the inventory that has a waiting list, and a school in the third-year report card that was in the 99th percentile in the state of Ohio in terms of the performance of third graders in reading and math. Over here, we have the last 2 years of a STEM high school called MC Square, which is a high school, again, a Cleveland Municipal School District high school that is not a selective high school, but takes students who have that passion, interest. They go all year round. I know this sounds really out of the box, but they have a 10-week semester with a 2-week break, a 10-week semester with a 2-week break, a 10-week semester with a 2-week break, etc. It's a fabulously interesting, oriented, can-do project high school. So to some degree, the university is increasingly becoming an educational park. And this notion of it being an educational park, I think, has resonance for our students, for our faculty who have been tremendously engaged in these projects, et cetera. So today is another partnership with the City Club. I don't think that we could have had a more esteemed start to this partnership than to have Bruce here to talk to us about his latest work and his life work. So thank you all for being here. I won't physically say I should turn over the microphone, but I'll leave the microphone here if that's okay. And I'll ask Dan Moulthrop and Kathy Hexter to come up to tell us a little more about the partnership. Thank you very much.
Way down. Good afternoon. So Dan and I are really excited to be standing here before you today to talk just very briefly about this partnership. And we really need to thank Alan Unger and the Unger Family Foundation because without their support, this partnership wouldn't have happened, I don't think. This is a relationship that both organizations have nurtured for a long time. Carrie Miller, who's the program director for the City Club, who's standing over there, has been on our Forum Advisory Committee for many years. And for those of you who've been to forums before, you know that Dan has been a very active partner when he was over at WCPN. And so we're just very grateful to Alan and his family foundation and the hard work of Molly Schnoke and Carrie Miller, who made it possible to cement this relationship, starting with this forum here today. The Unger family has a strong and long-standing relationship with both the City Club and the college. Paul Unger, who was Alan's father, was very active in the City Club, and the foundation's relationship with the college goes back to the Unger International Program for Local Government Leadership, which was created here at the college in 2001. And I understand that Paul was known by his friends and colleagues as someone who puts people and ideas together. And that is exactly what both the City Club does and what the Forum does. And so I think this is a really exciting partnership, and I hope that he would have found great pleasure in knowing that these two organizations are working together today. And as President Berkman said, I can't think of a better way to kick off this partnership than with our speaker, Bruce Katz, and our very esteemed and eclectic panel here today. And we look forward to working together in the future. And just one more thing. So Dan introduced this partnership at the City Club earlier today, where Bruce was the speaker, and he held up this book, which has been sitting on my bookshelf since I've been working at the college. This was done in 1986. It is called Advancing Cleveland. If you would look, and it was a partnership between the City Club and the college, looking at issues related to advancing Cleveland, the same thing we're talking about today. If you look in the table of contents, you will see many names that you recognize.
Norm Krumholtz.
Norm Krumholtz, who's here today, Steve Minter. Anyway, I'm not going to read the names. The point is, what they concluded after doing something like 12 forums was that they needed more collaboration, and they needed more networking, and they needed to think as a region. But they concluded that they weren't ready to do that. The time wasn't right, and there was no leadership. And I would just say that I think
28 years later.
Here we are. The time is right. We have leadership, and we are working on these things. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Kathy. It gives me great pleasure to be here as well, representing the City Club of Cleveland, and to work with you, Kathy, and Molly as well. And President Berkman, thank you very much for your kind remarks. In my career recently, over the last couple of years, have been privy to some of the things that have been going on at CSU with respect to living out the engaged learning ideal. And much of it thanks to the hard work and dedication of Byron White, who's the Vice President for Engagement, who's sitting right here, and President Berkman as well. At the City Club, we've been doing engagement for 100 years or so, personally me for 4 months. But we feel like we do a really good job at it, but we cannot do as good a job as we might do without great partners. And it's when we can take our power to convene conversation and bring it together with the excellent academic rigor that happens here at the Levin College that some really magical things can happen. And so we're really pleased to be able to do it. Alan, thank you so much for your support of this collaboration. And we're really looking forward to this conversation today, which will take what we discussed at the City Club earlier today and push it a little bit further and even localize it a little bit more. So thank you very much for being here and for supporting all of this, and let's get started.
Okay, Mitty Davis-Jones is going to introduce our speaker, Bruce Katz.
Bruce Katz, our speaker today, is a vice president at the Brookings Institution and co-founding director of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program. He's also co-author of the Metropolitan Revolution, which is a distillation of some of his work regarding emerging metropolitan-led next economy and its practitioners around the country. Mr. Katz regularly advises federal, state, regional, and municipal leaders on policy reforms that advance the competitiveness of metropolitan areas. He counsels on shifting demographic trends and market trends, as well as on policies critical to metropolitan and new forms of metropolitan governance. After the 2008 presidential election, he co-led the Housing and Urban Development Issues Transition Team for the Obama administration and served as a senior advisor to Secretary Sean Donovan of the Housing and Urban Development Department for the first 100 years of that administration. Mr. Katz has lectured and given presentations before public, corporate, civic, and university bodies in the United States. And in recent years, he has also lectured in other countries such as Canada. I didn't know Canada was another country, just joking. I'm from Detroit, and we just shoot across the river and go to Canada. China, Germany, Turkey, Great Britain, Italy, and South Africa. In 2006, he received a prestigious award, the Heinz Award in Public Policy, for his prestigious contributions to the understanding of the function and values of cities and metropolitan areas and profoundly influencing their economic vitality, livability, and sustainability. Mr. Katz is a graduate of Brown University and Yale Law School and a visiting professor at the London School of Economics. My schedule prevented me from getting to the City Club today, so I'm indeed looking forward to your comments this evening. Mr. Katz. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction. So this is in honor of Ned. So let's say when we started the Metropolitan Policy Program, at that point it was an urban center, one of the first stops we made was to Cleveland State. Because at the time, you know, when you looked around the United States, there were really 7 or 10 schools, graduate schools in particular, that were doing sort of cutting-edge research. And, you know, did probably about a 6-month tour, pulled together a group of universities. The work that was being done here was just absolutely stellar because it was quality work, it was independent, but it also was having impact. And so we've continued to work with Ned and his colleagues here for a very long time. So President Berkman, it's just it's a thrill to be back here and to see how an urban university really can be a platform for impact and change and reform over a long period of time. So the Metropolitan Revolution. This is a book which is a long time in the making in some respects, but obviously was accelerated by the strange situation we find ourselves in the United States when we have a national government that has essentially left the building, which is just really given this more emphasis and urgency. So the perspective of the book, first and foremost, is that this is a pivotal decade, and it's a pivotal decade because the Great Recession is still with us in many respects. We still have to grow 10 million jobs to make up the jobs we lost, keep pace with population dynamics. But more importantly, we have to grow different kinds of jobs. We have to grow better jobs, pay better wages, better benefits, because we've seen a growth, quantum leap really, in poverty and near poverty from 81 million in 2000 to 107 million in 2011. That's partly the recession, it's partly the collapse of manufacturing in many parts of the Midwest, other parts of the country during the early part of the last decade. So in theory, if we were gonna have a summit of mainstream economists, I would emphasize mainstream, what we would talk about is the need to literally transition and restructure an economy, which one pre-recession was characterized by consumption and debt and some very foolish financial engineering that hurt a lot of people, millions of people in this country, including many homeowners in this city and this region, to an economy that really is fueled by innovation, idea generation for sure, but also production, entrepreneurship, technology, engineering, powered by lower carbon, not just because of the existential threat of climate change, but because the clean economy really is the next industrial revolution, and you want to be a country that's at the vanguard of it. An economy that's driven by exports and foreign investment and global engagement and high-skilled immigration. If you actually build that kind of economy, you yield more and better jobs, and you really build a resilient economy that is prepared to weather the storms of the global economy. Now, again, in theory, it'd be helpful to have a national government. We don't have one right now that seems capable of acting with purpose and deliberation and setting a vision for the nation, then executing on the vision. This is a federal government that is really mired in partisan rancor and riven by ideological polarization. And if people think, well, maybe it's just cyclical and they'll bounce back to life in 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, when they do come back to life, here's what they're going to find. That we're going to have a few minor changes in the structure of the national budget given the aging of our demographics. We predicted this for 25 years. It's now here. And so a larger portion of the federal spending will basically go towards the mandatory budgets of health care, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and payment on the debt. And what that will do is begin to squeeze down federal investments in R&D and defense and education and skills and infrastructure and housing. And just to get a little more specific about this, and this is the president's own budget and the Congressional Budget Office looking out 10 years. 10 years from now, we will spend $1.6 trillion more a year on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And so what's happening in the United States, and it's not like there was the president, the Congress decided to send a memo to the states and the cities and the metro. Oh, by the way, you're now in charge of many of the major investments that a nation has to make to continue to thrive and prosper. But that's what's happening already with sequestration, and that's going to happen even more. Now, the good news, cities and metropolitan areas really have gotten the signals that this big structural shift is underway. And not uniformly, but increasingly around the country, they are stepping up and they are doing the hard work to grow jobs and make their economies more prosperous. And they're doing that because they're very powerful. There are 388 metros in the United States. There'll be a quiz tomorrow, by the way. And all metros together in the United States, and these are just cities and suburbs that act as commuter sheds, all metros together are 91% of the GDP of this country. 91%, right? The top 100 are 2/3 of the population, 3/4 of the GDP. And on every single element that drives a national economy, whether it's skilled workers, whether it's infrastructure to move people, goods, energy, and ideas, whether it's innovation, however we want to measure innovation, patents, advanced industry, they're 75, 80, 85, 90% and more of the national share. So for all intents and purposes, there really is not an American economy. We're a network of very powerful metropolitan economies. And to a large extent, the rest of the world just wants to be like us. Like, that's what's happening in China. That's what's happening in India. That's what was already underway in Brazil. They're urbanizing, they're industrializing. Now, these cities and metros understand, in the absence of a national government, they can't go back to the pre-recession economy. They need to move forward to a very different kind of economy that's productive and innovative, inclusive, and more resilient. So here's what they're doing.
For decades, the United States built its economy on debt and consumption. For cities, this meant throwing public money at sports arenas and stealing businesses from their neighbors with tax breaks. But what about after the game? You can't build an economy around beer and hot dogs. And what happens when the businesses you stole leave for a better deal somewhere else? The Great Recession was a wake-up call. We forgot the fundamentals. Productive and innovative growth drive consumption, not the other way around. Smart metro leaders are going back to basics, investing in infrastructure, making manufacturing a priority again, connecting small businesses with investors in new markets, helping workers get the skills they need. If metros get the basics right, the beer and hot dogs will follow.
So I apologize to the Cleveland Indians. They're doing very well this season, but I do differ about the subsidization of sports stadia. What's happening in the country that really matters? If you go to LA, if you go to Denver, they're using local resources to invest in state-of-the-art transit, obviously to move people quicker through these dense metropolitan areas, but also to send a signal to the world, we're going to be a sustainable metropolis. Come bring your innovative firms and talented workers. Northeast Ohio, a major part of our book, which I'll talk about a little more, a very smart network of business leaders, companies, institutions, intermediaries to help a network of small and medium-sized manufacturing firms sharpen their business plans, retool their facilities, retrain their workers, and really invent and produce the next products for the global economy. New York City, 7 years ago, having committed to subsidize 2 stadia on the west side, after they didn't get the Olympics bid, decided to actually do something intelligent, which is to attract Cornell and Technion to Roosevelt Island. $100 million of public capital budget to prepare the infrastructure, $2 billion of private capital today to build out the new Advanced Applied Sciences campus, and predicted over several decades, tens of billions of dollars of private investment, 50,000 jobs, 1,000 and more startups. That's smart economic strategy. Portland, very strange place, weird and crunchy, right? We love Portlandia. It actually is an export powerhouse. It's one of the few metropolitan areas to actually double exports in the middle part of the last decade because of computers and electronics, but because Portland actually manufactures sustainable products and provides sustainable services that Beijing, Shanghai, Rio, Sao Paulo need, right? So Portland is an export powerhouse, and therefore they can have all the granola that they want. Houston, neighborhood centers, a network of 21st century settlement houses to integrate tens of thousands of immigrants from all over the world into the economic and social mainstream. So English as a second language, low-cost banking, charter schools, access to quality health care, arts and culture in neighborhoods. It's a remarkable story in one of the most diverse metropolitan areas and in the United States. And then finally, Detroit, which Detroit, obviously the story that is mostly told about Detroit is a city that's completely bankrupt and a city that needs to shrink because it's 138 square miles, but it's gone from 2 million people to less than 700,000. Well, in the core of the city, very small piece, only about 3% of the landmass, is the downtown along the riverfront. Canada actually sits to the south. Some great assets in architecture, the Woodward Corridor, and then up to Midtown, Wayne State, Henry Ford Health System, Detroit Medical Campus, College for Creative Studies, a rebirth of small tech firms, creative firms happening in this very fiscally challenged and socially challenged city. Those are the stories we tell in this book. They're really stories of networked leadership, and we figured we'd come home here and just talk a little about this remarkable story of Northeast Ohio, because this is not just about Cleveland City or even Cleveland Metro, but the broader Northeast Ohio region, including Youngstown, including Canton, including Akron. And what you see happening here after a series of devastating articles and editorials by the Cleveland Plain Dealer, really going back 10 or 12 years, called The Quiet Crisis, which had been underway for many, many decades, is a commitment by a series of philanthropies, the Gunn Foundation, the Cleveland Foundation, et cetera, to invest in a very different strategy to reshape, literally reshape the structure of the economy and provide a platform for the regrowth of both traditional manufacturing firms and other tech-driven, innovative firms within the region off of the particular clusters that this region excels in. And so what you have is a fund for economic future, a series of intermediaries like Nortech, like BioEnterprise, some of which had been birthed really at Greater Cleveland Partnership and some of the predecessors. Over time, very short period of time, it's accelerating, growing jobs, growing payroll, attracting private investment. This is the kind of smart strategic economic development, but also network collaboration between philanthropy, between business, between government, other civic institutions that is needed. Now here's Brad Whitehead, who is in the audience, talking about this remarkable collaborative.
It doesn't exist anymore where somebody sits up on the top of the mountain and tells everybody what to do. Any one of us alone is not significant enough to make a difference on a global stage. But when we come together as communities that didn't used to come together and work at this metropolitan level, we can roar with the best of the lions. And I think we're starting to see that, and we're starting to become believers, and we see more and more people joining the revolution.
I did not pay Brad for that. But that really is, I think, the best expression of dozens of leaders from around the country who are talked about in this story, describing the power of the network, the power of institutions that are generally separated by sector or discipline or jurisdiction, or leaders who are divided traditionally by party or ideology coming together to do grand things together. So that's our story of some transformative interventions that are happening around the country. I mean, frankly, there's another 20 or 25 we talk about in the book, but not with the same depth or specificity. And I think really the challenge for us as a country over the next several years, given the fact that the national government seems to be on a frolic and a detour, and given that many states, frankly, are doing more harm than good, right, particularly with their major cities, how do we populate this map with game-changing interventions, metro by metro, that really invest in the things that matter? Innovation, infrastructure, skills, the quality of place, right? That is demanded by talented workers and innovative firms, and that serves the broader citizenry. So our sense is there is a way to start or continue, in this case, a revolution. Really at the base of it is a network. Cities and metros are not governments. Federal government is a government. States are governments. Cities and metros really are co-produced, their economies are co-produced, and they're co-governed by these disparate institutions and leaders. And what you see in the book are really different kind of networks forming to get stuff done. In New York City, it was sometimes I don't say charismatic mayor, very wealthy mayor, right, who really crowdsourced the notion of an applied science district. It's not like Bloomberg fell out of bed on a Tuesday and said, you know what, we got to attract, some world-beating engineering universities to New York City to diversify our economy. That was a crowdsourced idea. They brought in hundreds of corporate, civic, and university leaders and say, what's going to get us back on track after Lehman collapse? In Northeast Ohio, what you really have is an institution like the Fund for Economic Future acting as the hub of networks, right? Institutions, intermediaries that can really work with these small firms that really more characterize the American economy than large vertically integrated companies, right? This is not 1950. This is a radically different, distributed, networked economy, and you need this kind of structure to basically provide the support. And then in Detroit, and I did see someone tweeted that I was quoting Paul Simon. That's absolutely true. What you have is a loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires coming together. I mean, there's no formal network. There's no like Revive Detroit Inc. or Revive Detroit organization. It's networks of networks loosely affiliating to revive the central core. Now, once you figure out your network, and sometimes the vision comes first and then the network happens, but it's not a cookbook. It really is important to know who you are and how you differentiate yourself from other metropolitan areas, either domestically or globally. At the City Club, I quoted one of the great American philosophers of the late 20th century, Dolly Parton, who said, find out who you are and do it on purpose, right? And that's really important in the post-recession economy, because in the pre-recession economy, you would go to suburban Cleveland, or you would go to suburban Charlotte, or you would go to Phoenix or Pittsburgh or Detroit or Denver, and frankly, you would never know where you were, because you would see Walmarts and you would see the same strip malls and you would see the same consumption economy. It was completely ubiquitous. It was just stamped out over the American landscape. But when you think about what matters and what makes you globally competitive, the traded sectors, the production, the innovative economy, the tech economy, exports, foreign investment, what this place does is very different than what a Charlotte does. Your face to the United States and your external face to the world. So in New York, what they understood is they were too dependent on financial services after the collapse of Lehman, and they did not have enough STEM in their system, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math, not just to service the financial sector, but to retail, media, fashion. Portland understood that they were an export powerhouse, and they actually had an advantage in the clean economy. And that could be not just good for people living in Portland, walkable, livable, better air, better water. You can export that, the goods and the services. And in Detroit, again, very small, excuse me, let's go quick. Too much talking today. Detroit, again, it's the power of the small. Remember the book Small is Beautiful? Small is powerful. The entire American economy, you saw the metro statistics, all 100 metros on 12% of the landmass. Within that 12% of the landmass, very small nodes of hyper-innovative activity where advanced research institutions and our advanced companies are located, right? The entire country is really off a very small portion of our landmass, right? Driving the productive, innovative economy. That's what's happening in Detroit. That's what can be basically brought back. Finally, the game changer. Overused terms, but actually most cities and metros, if you ask them, last 50 years, last 75 years, what was your game changer, right? They would probably be able to say, you know, when the Cleveland Clinic really began to operate, it's not just a health serving, institution, a service delivery, but as an innovative powerhouse, or University of Washington, Seattle, et cetera, et cetera. New York, Northeast Ohio, Detroit are all trying to be innovative economies. And in New York, it's to try to create a new institutional platform, right? At one point, Stanford was competing to be at Roosevelt Island, ultimately Cornell and Technion. Just imagine a branch of Stanford on Roosevelt Island, right? I mean, it's remarkable what these advanced research institutions and urban serving universities can do. Northeast Ohio, again, you have a network of very innovative firms, but how do you support them? Help them get to the next generation of products and services. And Detroit, it's this new spatial geography of innovation. It's no longer the science parks 40 miles away from a central city with closed suburban campuses. That was a model, almost a Cold War model, of invent secrets within the four walls of a suburban isolated corporation, and wonderful things will happen. Well, the new model is come to a downtown or a midtown around your universities, walkable, livable, transit connected. It's not just workers who want that, it's companies that want open innovation. So if we do this, with purpose and deliberation in metro after metro, Washington can shut down. They can read from Dr. Seuss if they want during filibusters. They can really do whatever they want at some level. But cities and metros still have power. They still have resources. Their balance sheets are not just the city governments. They're universities and medical campuses and corporations. They can do things, and they continue to innovate and progress. So maybe this is where the United States is headed in the 21st century.
From an early age, we are taught how our nation is supposed to work. The president, vice president, and members of Congress sit at the top. Governors and legislators run their states. The rest of us take our cues from them. While states and the federal government may be part of the Constitution, our population and economic power is actually concentrated in our metropolitan areas. It's time to rethink power in America. In this century, metros will lead, and states and the federal government will follow. In cities and metros, public, private, and civic leaders are helping workers get the skills they need, investing in infrastructure and growing jobs through expanded trade and investment, the hard work necessary to renew our economy.
So it's a pleasure to be back in Cleveland. I think what we were saying in this book is the title of the chapter. Cleveland represents the post-hero economy. You can't wait for Washington. You can't wait for a Steve Jobs to decide to locate to your city or metropolis and by themselves suddenly generate an entire economy, right? You can't wait for some other external event. It is within the networks of leaders and institutions within a metropolis and within the grander region, broader region, to understand who they are, to form their networks, and then design, finance, and deliver their game-changing initiatives. That's how America will move forward this decade. Frankly, that's how we think we will move forward this century. And then the rest of the world, just as they copied our revolution in the late 18th century, they ultimately will copy this metropolitan revolution. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Christine Mayer. I'm the president of the GAR Foundation, which is a private foundation in Summit County that has been very involved in the Fund for Our Economic Future and a number of other regional initiatives. We are big fans of Chapter 4 of your book, Bruce.
It's the rest of the book.
Exactly. So today I'm going to moderate our panel discussion, and just in terms of the logistics and housekeeping matters, y'all are encouraged to come up with very interesting and contrarian and thought-provoking questions. Molly gave out, I think, some cards when you walked in, so you can write on those. She has more that she's holding up in the back. So when you come up with your great questions, you can raise your hand and she'll collect those and bring them up at some point. Until we get those, we're going to get started with introducing the panelists. And you also should have picked up when you came in a sheet of their bios. I'm not going to go through everybody's extensive credentials, or we would blow our whole time here. So I'll just quickly introduce who we're talking to. You've already heard from Bruce. I would simply add that at the City Club today, in front of hundreds of people, he encouraged some 15-year-olds to drink beer, I think. That's how I remembered it going down. That was sort of a network and crossing boundaries type of discussion gone awry. To his left, we have Ziona Austrian. And Ziona is the director of the Center for Economic Development and a college fellow here at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State. Very importantly, in recent years, Ziona has headed up a team that has done some really important analysis and work around Northeast Ohio's regional competitiveness agenda. And most recently, the What Matters to Metro report has come out. Hopefully you all have a copy of it, by your bedside. It's great work, and it really, a lot of that is foundational to all the great things going on in Northeast Ohio that Bruce and Jennifer wrote about in their book. Next to Ziona, we have Jeremy Nowak. Jeremy is the president of J. Nowak and Associates, LLC, which is a consulting firm that counsels business and social sector institutions. He is also interim director of ArtPlace, which is a national organization investing in art programs to help transform communities. There were some comments in today's discussion at the City Club about the role of arts and culture in supporting and accelerating regional prosperity, and so I'm hoping that we can elicit some comments from Jeremy on that score. And then lastly, we have David Franklin, another person who is well qualified to talk art. David is the director of the Cleveland Museum of Art, has been here since 2010, and I think will for sure be able to comment for us on the importance of arts and cultural institutions to healthy, thriving regions. So with that, since I have not received the crush of questions from the crowd yet, we'll start with a few that we brought in. And actually, I think before we even do that, we're going to just zip down the line here. Bruce, I don't know if you have comments you want to add since you've been on the hot seat, but the rest of y'all have just a few minutes to make a couple high-level comments about your perspective on the issues we're discussing.
Hi, good afternoon. I want to use my time for these introductory comments to share the major findings for the study you just mentioned on what matters to Metro. What we did, we used data for 115 metropolitan areas across the country, and we looked at metro areas that have population between 400,000 people, which is similar to our Canton metro area, and up to MSAs with 3.5 million people, which is the size of San Diego, the size of Minneapolis. We collected data on 55 different variables that characterize economics and sustainability and education and innovation. And we used the factor analysis to reduce the numbers of all these 55 variables into a smaller group of factors that will help us understand the mechanisms that drive regional economic growth. So we identified six different factors. I will mention the first three of them that account for most of the variations and explain the most. But then we also used regression analysis to associate each of these six factors with measures of economic growth. We're really trying to understand what is linked to economic growth. So the first factor that we identified with the fund, with the Council of Economic Advisors, and Emily is here in the audience who worked with us on this research, the first factor is named talent, education, and innovation. And what's interesting about this is that it's pulling together variables that describe educational attainment, that describe high-tech, STEM, arts occupation, and innovation, and it pulls it out together. So what does it mean? It means that metro areas that have high shares of educational attainment also have high levels of high-tech occupations and also have high levels of innovation. So it's all in one factor. And this factor is positively associated, positively linked with growth in per capita income, in productivity, and in gross regional product, which is a measure of output, measure of scale of the economy. Where are we ranked in Northeast Ohio? Cleveland ranked number 59 out of 115, which put us in the third quintile. But if you compare, so it's not that bad, but if you compare us to other large areas in the Midwest, we are 7 out of 9. Akron ranked 80, which puts the Akron in the fourth quintile, and then Canton and Youngstown were in the fifth quintile. If you dig in behind what's in this factor, because it is the most important factor, we find out that if we look at Cleveland, we ranked much higher in all the variables that relate to innovation, and what's pulling us down is the education attainment. So if you think about policy implications, where we really need to improve is on our education attainment and workforce development. The second factor is economic polarization and opportunity. And what's interesting about this one is that it's negatively associated with income, which you would expect, but it's positively associated with employment growth. So what does it mean? It means that areas that have experienced growing employment in the past 20 years are also experiencing more inequality and more polarization. So we spend a lot of time trying to understand why areas that have employment growth are more polarized and really have more inequality. So let's think about where the growth occurred in the past 20 years. It was mainly in service-related industries. And jobs in services-type jobs are bifurcated. We have the low-skill, low-wage jobs in fast food, in hotels, in retail, in restaurants. And then on the other hand, we have the high-skill, high-wage jobs in IT, in legal, in accounting, or the business services. So when you think about it, you can then see that not all jobs are the same. And it's not just enough, and I think, Bruce, you said, it's not just enough to have a goal of growing employment. We want to have good jobs. And I will conclude with the third factor, which was labeled entrepreneurship and inclusion. And this one is really associated with growth in all 4 measures of economic growth. It's positively associated with growth of employment, gross regional product, productivity, and income. All the metro areas in Northeast Ohio are ranked pretty low. The best in the Midwest is Minneapolis. I think it's not a surprise. But other Midwest MSAs are also ranked in the 4th and 5th quintile, where Northeast Ohio MSAs are ranked. And I think with this, I will stop. And if you have more questions, I'll be happy to respond to later. I just want to maybe mention the name. I'm sorry, just to mention the names of the other 3 factors, because we did find 6 factors. The 3 that I detailed really is what the fund is concentrated on and what a lot of talk around town is about. But the other 3 is business cost, is dynamics of place, and connectivity. Now I'm done.
Other factors?
No.
Just really quickly, it's a pleasure to be here. In a previous career, in a previous life, I ran an organization that did about $1 billion of investments in mid-Atlantic cities, and I think it was 15 years ago or so, Bruce, that Bruce asked Ned Hill and I to write something together. That's when my first connection. That's when I found out that Ned Hill was my moderate alternative, as I used to say. And we wrote something that ended up, I think, being very, very useful. So it's a pleasure to be here. I want to actually make comments in a slightly different way, which is to make comments by asking Bruce a set of questions. It's a great book, and so I'm an unabashed admirer of the book. And but I jotted down a few questions that sort of struck me that I'd like to ask, and maybe it's a way to kind of push the issues a little bit more. So this is a book that obviously, as Bruce just noted, is a book that, while it's about a set of metropolitan/urban transactions with these, horizontal networks, this is also a book that is about, obviously, government, what the role of government is right now and what it maybe ought to be. And there's a really nice part of the book that talks about the evolution of federalism during different periods. And so I guess one question, Bruce, for us, I think, is that there's still, even by the sort of grim statistics of what will happen with discretionary spending over the next 10 years, there's still a significant amount of resources that go through domestic budgets federally. They're largely based on formulas, demographic formulas, poverty formulas, depending on the program. They operate with various levels of efficiency, as we know. And so I guess the first question I would ask is if you suggested in this book that we need a new kind of bottom-up or a new kind of collaborative, I think you called it, federalism. If we could redesign it, if there was the political space or institutional space to do this redesign, what would it look like? How would it happen? And perhaps what are some examples of that, even if there's just precursors to that, would be one question. So I'm going to ask just two others, and then maybe we'll get to these because there are ways to get around. A really fascinating sort of sub-theme in the book, subtext in the book, is a polarity that Jennifer, your co-author, and you set up. And it's a really interesting polarity between, I think it was right here, between, a federal and to some extent state systems that are rules-based, that are process-oriented versus outcome-based, that are, I'll use my language, they were vertical more than horizontal, right? They're more partisan than they are pragmatic, right? And then you counterpose that to something that is happening locally and regionally, where they're more horizontal again, they're based on these more flexible networks, and they're more pragmatic than partisan. And obviously what you try to do in the case studies is sort of give examples of that. But I would sort of want to push back a little bit on that and just sort of ask the question, is that really about, so my experience locally is that an awful lot of what happens that is effective locally happens despite local government, not because of local government. It's not like they've been able to evade the process versus outcome aspects of this. I mean, you gave some great examples of people that I think are on the right page. And I guess the question I would ask is therefore your polarity about different levels of government, and I understand you're not saying it's just about government on the second, or is it about something that's happening because of technology and culture, because of the ability to manage information, the ability to do all kinds of things that consumers can do now and that firms can do now. So is there something in the water that's really different, that's allowing that kind of local stuff to happen, that has very little to do with the distinction between government as a local subset, whether it's regional governments or local governments versus the feds? So I just want to throw that out. And I think the book recognizes that, so I'm not, but I think it seems to me that's what we're looking at as a part here. And then I would just sort of ask kind of one other question or push you. So one of your parts, so a lot of the work I've done, as many people know, has dealt with pretty distressed cities and places. I always said that, I'm from Philadelphia, so I always thought if all my work were in Seattle or Portland, I'd be a really different person. I'd likely be nice and stuff like that, right? But it's in Philadelphia, right? And when I look at our numbers, and quite frankly, when I look at, and I love Cleveland, so go Tribe, and don't take this the wrong way. When I look at the numbers of Cleveland, the city numbers, not the metro numbers, but the city numbers, they're stark. They're pretty dramatic. So let me give you an example, not metro talent, because that is, you're right, one thing to look at. But I was doing calculations recently looking at the relationship in cities, only cities, between adults with a bachelor's degree or more and individuals, adults with less than a high school diploma. In Seattle, the city of Seattle, it's 8-to-1, so 8 people with a bachelor's degree or more for every one with less than a bachelor's degree. With less than a high school, excuse me. And in Cleveland, it is about 0.7, it's about 1 to 0.7. So in Cleveland, the numbers are just dramatic. It's worse in Detroit. Philly's only a little bit better, as is Baltimore. And so we could sort of spin out lots of these. I mean, Philadelphia, which has a much ballyhooed view of itself right now because for the first time in 50 years, it didn't lose population. And all its gains were in 22 to 34-year-olds. But in fact, if you look at the numbers, all of its losses were in 5 to 17-year-olds. People are still fleeing really dramatically. You can't contain and can't maintain people that need public services and that can exercise choices. So to what extent, the conversation about the metropolitan revolution, which I think is real, and I think you kind of lay it out really nicely. But when you're in a Cleveland or a Detroit or a Philadelphia or a Baltimore, any of a number of other places, the dramatic sort of nature of decline in the center of this is something that I think for most of us in terms of local politics and local policy is the most striking. And I think you and I would agree that in the best possible world, the federal government deals with poverty, and regions deal with infrastructure, and localities should create an entrepreneurial system, an entrepreneurial corporate system. But we're not in the best of all possible worlds, and so locality is driven to these other things. So I wondered when you and Jennifer were writing this, you're a person that knows this as a HUD guy that for a long time, you know these numbers better than I do. What were your thoughts about that? How are you thinking about it? If you can go 10, 15, 20 years down the pike and thinking about it, what does it look like? What's the uptake for these places? And so I'll stop right there. Thank you. Yeah, he'll answer them after or tonight.
Okay. Am I on? I did want to start to say by saying that maybe Canada and the United States might be the same country, but we would like the Stanley Cup back north of the border this year, please. Thank you to President Berkman for the introduction, and it's really a joy to be with this esteemed panel. I did want to start really with sort of an anecdote or a vignette, talk about one of the most important innovations at the CMA, the Cleveland Museum of Art in my time, and that is opening a contemporary art space in Ohio City on West 29th, working with the Bidwell Foundation. I don't know if any of you have been there. It was a rehabilitated transformer station. And before that place opened, and I don't know if you visited there in earlier days, in fact, I think the first week there, Mr. Bidwell got his car broken into as he was scanning the joint, but persevered. But really, it was essentially, the only thing artistic there was the tattoo parlors. But in a very short time, we've seen buildings redeveloped, that retail renovated to housing for artists, restaurants are coming in, other art galleries are going to come along. And so we've had music, film screenings, In other words, it wasn't just that we put a gallery in an emerging neighborhood. That neighborhood was not emerging. The Cleveland Museum's presence there was actually the anchor, the catalyst for developing that neighborhood, something the Kresge Foundation calls creative placemaking. Thinking more broadly about the Cleveland Museum of Art and the economy, it's not necessarily our strength to talk about that as opposed to Picasso and other things, but we are definitely a business, and we have a powerful impact on the local economy. We welcomed 500,000 visitors to the museum last year, 100,000 of those from out of town, so we do drive tourism. We have a $40 million operating budget, a $700 million endowment. We are the third or fourth richest museum in the world for endowment. We are ourselves an economic powerhouse and have a tremendous impact, not just through our building campaign, that $350 million building campaign, but just through the impact we have on the local economy. So I can throw out the numbers like any business. But of course, we're all about the intangibles and our cultural impact. What is that really? How can we unwrap that a little bit more sensitively, let's say? And I think we know for a fact there are many studies that show that people want to live in cities where there's great culture. So I know this anecdotally from where I live, from Cleveland Clinic and UH surgeons from all over the world. One of the first things they say is they came to Cleveland, stayed in Cleveland, because of the museum, the orchestra, and other types of events of those organizations of that type. So we know that strong cultural organizations will have an economic impact in allowing individuals and businesses to want to be in Cleveland. And finally, the museum believes very powerfully in something we refer to as the power of partnerships. We really recognize, and I recognize coming in as an outsider, how important collaboration is in Cleveland. We can talk about University Circle itself for a long, long time, and itself this sort of pinwheel of contacts and networking that seems to be almost a model itself for the country as a positive force in civic development. But more specifically to us, we've just announced a $15 million partnership with Case Western Reserve University. Uniquely, we bought a piece of land with the university. This has never happened before. And forming now a future art historical institute where we will create jobs. Very, very few jobs, but we will create some jobs in developing a Cleveland style of curator that will go out and prosper in the world. So the collaboration with Case, building this unique site, I think is a phenomenal thing, and we're all very, very proud of that, definitely, to invigorate the academic side of the university with museum support. So we really believe in everything Bruce has said about reshaping the economy and taking on these big challenges, and the museum is proud to play a part, and we're certainly a catalyst in all of this, so thank you.
Okay. So Bruce, I'm thinking maybe we'll have you address a couple of Jeremy's questions, but a few that have come in from the crowd, I think, tie into those really well. So I'm going to just add a little bit. I think this relates to Jeremy's first comment about sort of the old-fashioned linear hierarchical, process style of resource flow versus this progressive, flexible network style that you talk about in your book. Someone asked, how can metros move forward without the federal government when many local programs are set up in a hierarchical manner, and the citation to workforce development and things like that. So I think that's just another way of expressing, these are two different styles, and clearly you've highlighted in your book a lot of the positive attributes of the more progressive network style. How do you get from this one to this one? The only other comment I would say is today at the City Club, you said sometimes the local communities have to tolerate the federal government like the crazy uncle, who is, craziness notwithstanding, is still your most generous benefactor, so you sort of tolerate it. I guess, how do you still get the check, still get the check from the crazy uncle and move to this new model that is more outcomes driven when the fact is the dollars are still in large part flowing the old way?
Well, these are really wonderful questions, and I would start by actually maybe even combining what I think the new federalism is and this new polarity. By just telling a quick anecdote, I was at the Waldorf Astoria on a panel with Kenneth Jackson, who is one of my favorite historians. You know, he wrote the Encyclopedia of New York City, which is the kind of thing I read at night, you know, because it's just very odd. So I went through my usual shtick about, there was a song back in the 70s, "We Built This City." I don't remember who it was, Bay City Rollers or something, you know, horrible band. Jefferson Starship, it's even worse. So Kenneth Jackson is listening to this and, you know, doesn't really know where it's going. And he says, "Okay, Bruce, actually, that's right. If we started tunneling down from the Waldorf Astoria and started hitting all the separate bits of infrastructure in New York City, the transit, the water, the sewer, the electric. I mean, we really began to peel back the onion of how that city was built. It really harkens back to the late 19th century and early 20th century, where basically the federal government ran the post office, occasionally invaded a small Caribbean country or something. I mean, you know, it was a very small government, right? And the federal, our republic, basically was built by cities. States up till around 1837 when they all went bankrupt, but you know, they did a few things before that, the canals, and they did allow the railroad companies to incorporate and build across the country, but that led to a couple booms and busts. But cities really built the country in many respects. There was a bit of corruption there. Honest graft is what we used to call it. So I think the point that, you know, Ken was making was, it's not, everything will be a reference either to a movie or to a song. So it's not like the Talking Heads, same as it ever was, same as it ever was. Our federal system really is an evolving system. And it's gone through several phases up into really the Great Depression, when the national government was not that present in our lives. And then over the 20th century, we've really built this bureaucratic, gilded system of specialized agencies and interventions. And what that basically tells me then is that we do have the ability to rethink the role. And also because some of our partner and competitor nations, because we do both with these countries, do divide responsibilities up a little differently. In Germany, housing does not really sit at the federal level. It's been pushed down to the state level. In Canada, transportation, particularly transit, is more of a metropolitan and state, provincial responsibility. So just because we have a system the way we have one now doesn't mean that that's the way the system will be ad infinitum. Last point, and then I'll say what I really think how we should proceed. There is a sense, and I found this when Jennifer and I went around and talked to a lot of very esteemed reporters, none of whom names I'll mention. And it became very clear after 5 or 10 minutes of the conversation that they thought the federal government really did everything in our country. I mean, that it really was the main financier of all forms of infrastructure. It played a much bigger role in education and skills and a whole bunch of other things. And essentially what our book is saying, and a lot of Brookings research will show going forward, is we live in a highly variegated republic where the national government does a few things that it dominates. Social safety net, investment in basic science, and then it has a shared responsibility and participation in some parts of infrastructure, particularly roads, highways, to some extent transit, but not as substantial. But other parts of infrastructure are really devolved further down. And then education, only about 10 cents on a dollar is federal. The rest of it is state and local property tax driven for the most part. So we are already in a metropolitan nation in a way, in the way we finance those things that really do drive competitiveness and prosperity. And I think what we're basically saying to the national government, is do less better, right? Because you've become sort of a labyrinthian, sprawling legacy enterprise over last 70 or 80 years. Do what cities and metros and states, to some extent, can't do, or if they did do, would distort markets, right? And would lower productivity and lower efficiency, right? And so what that really means is, in some ways, having the federal government become a very large health insurance company and an army and a place, you know, a level of government that helps make work pay and supports the disadvantaged. In some ways, that's what they should do. And for other parts of the, either the productive or innovative or inclusive, you know, responsibilities that we have as a nation, they really do need to act in the service and as a reliable, supportive partner, not as the crazy uncle, really, who comes in occasionally and showers largesse and then disappears for long periods of time, right? You can tell the kind of family I came from. So I think in some ways, almost de facto, we're moving to a system where the national government will do less, and in some ways we're going back to the future. You know, where cities and metros are gonna have to figure out off of their asset base, the value of their economy, the balance sheets of cities, government, but also business, medical campuses, art communities with large endowment. I mean, this is, we're gonna have a very different financing system, essentially, for large portions of public goods or quasi-public goods, you know? So I think, I don't know, I actually think in a way this could make us more spatially divided as a country, but it probably means that, like a family that has to make a decision about where you invest, should we buy that second car, you know? You know, can we really afford to have our kid go to X college versus Y college and take on debt? I think cities and metros are gonna have to make some decisions about priorities in ways they did not have to before. And I actually think that's a good thing, that we're gonna weed out a lot of the stupid stuff. And I could go chapter and verse on stupid stuff at the local level, and probably begin to shift with the help of the Fund for Economic Future and these great academies, really begin to help differentiate, you know, what is an investment that is potentially has an ROI, you know, high ROI, return on investment, versus one that makes us feel good, but doesn't really have the same kind of long-term impact. So, long way of saying, we're not gonna have a constitutional convention in the United States. That would be an utter disaster for a whole bunch of reasons. Just watch last night's filibuster, you would understand. But let's imagine a virtual constitutional convention, right? Which I think is essentially what we're having anyway. And let's begin to resort responsibilities. And whoever takes on this mantle, Greater Philly, Greater Cleveland, Greater this, Greater that, I guarantee you will be more focused, more disciplined, more strategic in a relatively short period of time. So that was my answer to a first comment. I'm going to come back to some of the other questions later. Okay. Is that okay? Or does Jeremy want to?
Okay.
I want to come back to the arts piece also, because I think
That's actually my next area where I'm going here. I need like a card filing system. I've got all this paper in front of me, but I'm trying to group questions. We had a couple of questions related to the arts. And I think probably all of you have comments on it, because one of them that I view as possibly related is, how do we keep all the college graduates in this region? You know, once they graduate from institutions within the region, we're very rich in higher education institutions. So there's a question there about how do we keep them, that maybe ties in part to some of these quality of place type issues. We had another comment earlier today at the luncheon in which I think you were talking about Denver. You said, you know, sort of some of the first baby steps toward the center city and the suburbs working more closely and collaborating occurred around the arts and around arts and cultural initiatives that they could sort of collectively support. So I wonder if you all have, and Ziona, maybe from your data perspective of all the research you've done, maybe you can comment to some extent. I know that arts were not one of the specific factors per se, but if you could comment on talent and retaining talent and engaging talent. And Jeremy, I'd be curious about how your current work plays into this as well. And obviously, David, your tie into this one should be clear, I hope.
Okay. The one comment I want to make that the first factor that I mentioned, education, talent, and innovation, actually had one variable that touched upon arts, and it was really the percent of employees that have arts and entertainment occupations. And that it's interesting that it grouped together with innovation and education and talent. So I think, and this showed us that it really associated with growth in the economy. And then there's a lot of academic literature that shows that there is relationship, and maybe you can talk more about that, is between quality of place, and that's where people want to be. And I think that's also what helps us with resurgence of downtowns, where people want to live, where closer to the arts, the cultures, the happenings, and I think it's part of quality of life. And I think we all know that Northeast Ohio is very rich in culture, very rich in quality of life, and we really have a lot of attributes in that sense. So I think I'm not answering your question of how do we keep the graduates in, and I think that's almost a separate question. We have so many students, and how do we keep them? And I think one of the responses is internships, you know, make sure they are connected to local industry, to local companies, to local nonprofits, depends on their area of study, but students that come from out of town to Case, to CSU, to Kent, to University of Akron, they're coming from all over, and these are like imports. You know, you really want to keep them here. You want them to start their business here. You want them to contribute to our regional economy. And how do we keep them here? How do we keep them from going back to where they came from? So linking them to what's happening here, both culturally and work-wise, would be some of the solutions. And I think there are different initiatives here, internship initiatives that are at work that are trying to answer your question.
Okay, just a couple points on this. So I think there's great literature on creativity in place, art and culture in place. There's obviously some controversies, you know, related to it about what drives what. I would sort of just make 2 or 3 quick comments, though. So the one thing is I do think we have this experiment going on in this country right now in a lot of places where millennials, the 22 to 34-year-olds, or whatever the right number are growing in places and where their household formation sort of, so some may never have kids, many more people are living alone, some may have kids and get married or get together with a spouse later in life, and we don't know what it will look like when people have to make the decision within that group about whether to stay in a place, a downtown, or not. So whether that matters or not, because whether then there'll be new cohorts that sort of come in. Right, exactly. So if you kind of, you could never imagine the redevelopment of Philadelphia and its great downtown without its center city district. But if you want to sort of if the person that runs the bid, the center city district, he's got plenty to worry about, but if he wants to worry a lot, he worries about the decisions that renters with young kids or about to have kids, the decisions they're making, particularly for those people who can't privatize the costs of public goods and for whom schools are not good enough or other kinds of things. So we don't actually, in some ways, in a select subset of cities, know the answer to that, no matter how good the arts and cultural systems are, because people can, to be frank, can live in the suburbs and consume the art as they did for generations, going back. I think there's another issue here, and here I would sort of point to my sort of joke about this, my sort of brief foray into philanthropy in Philadelphia, where I ran a large philanthropy. And so I got to the job on the day that we made a very large grant to help the Philadelphia Orchestra get out of bankruptcy. And so which is out of bankruptcy, but they still have their issues. So all of the changes, all these sort of revolutionary shifts that we talk about in every other industry are happening as it relates to arts and performance in dramatic ways. And there are great people running legacy institutions, arts institutions, who have figured that out, and I'm sure you're one of them, and have gotten the memo and have figured out that the world's changed, that the way the opera company ran their subscription system and what they did and what their cost structure was can't be what it is going to be in the future. They made the shift. And there are a reasonable number, sadly, of people who are running those institutions who didn't get the memo, and their boards didn't get the memo. And so this profound shift that is going on with technology, with the way people use disposable income, with the remarkable diversity of choices that people have everywhere and everything, with the complexity of trying to monetize things on the internet. I speak to lots of museums who built a website and got really cool things on it, but they're not sure why half the time, right? What do they do with it? And the complexity of all this right now, and what it means for many arts and cultural institutions, including the ones that went through big building campaigns during that same consumption boom that you referred to there, is something that's just playing out right now. And some will do a great job responding to that, and some are doing a great job responding to that, and in many other places, this is actually at a crisis point. But it's the crisis that nobody, nobody talks about. Or they do maybe locally, but you don't see enough things on it. Occasionally you'll see it about orchestras or about. So this question of sort of the growth of arts and culture and its importance, yes, absolutely, but the issue of those institutions themselves becoming more nimble, more flexible, and smarter, particularly if they don't have a large endowment, right? Like my view is always, if I have a large endowment, I can sort of afford to make some, the Philadelphia Orchestra's problem is it sort of started to spend down its endowment, and then it was in bad shape. This, I think, is a big issue. And it's a big issue particularly because people think about these goods in ways that are different than they did before, and they're not local in the same sense. So some will make it, and some will not survive. And that's the same as we would say about the 2,400 four-year colleges in America, about all the cities that said, our future is eds and meds. Well, yeah, absolutely, but that's a world that's going through dramatic shifts and changes. So the issue is eds and meds, yes, but the eds and meds that are flexible and smart enough about blended learning to understand what it is going to be to survive in a world where technology is going to cut the cost structure dramatically there, as it has everywhere else in every other sector, in every other industry. So,
well, I can't quite remember the original question, but I'll make sort of two observations, maybe along the lines of that might answer the question. Well, first of all, when I arrived, one thing I noticed was that Cleveland was not perceived of as a very contemporary city, despite the pioneering efforts of great organizations like MoCA and Spaces and others. That somehow there was this uneasy relationship between the establishment or the locals and this idea of being perceived as very innovative in the arts and really out there on a limb. So part of my impetus for building the Transformer Station with the Bidwells was really to get more contemporary art space out there, just more activity. of a very unusual and innovative kind, just to start to put more places down where that activity could happen in a neighborhood setting as well. So people walking their dogs suddenly are exposed to radical contemporary art for the first time. So we make contemporary art very domestic and easy for them in some sort of way. And I live this too. I must admit, we tried to bring a senior contemporary art curator to Cleveland and absolutely failed. And everyone I spoke with said, I love Cleveland, but I want to stay in New York or Los Angeles or Paris. So it made me realize we have a lot of work to do in becoming contemporary, hiring younger curators and growing them. And that led to my second revelation, which is in other searches, we're struggling to hire Japanese curators, curators in many, many subject areas, except for Impressionism and Modern and Renaissance. But because we're an encyclopedic collection, we need to have the best of the best in the entire atlas. So how do we do that? Well, we grow them ourselves. We create our own Art Historical Institute with CASE and create our own program, our own style of teaching, one that suits that museum, and bring students here so that they grow up through our system, and then they stay because they wear our team shirt. Well, that doesn't work much anymore in sports, but I'd also say maybe more cynically too is maybe we don't want them all to stay. I mean, I think one of the prestige things that Cleveland needs to look at is training these incredible people in this crucible that we're going to have. Well, we'll be proud when a lot of them go out and work, in the Louvre or the Met or wherever. So I think we have to be a little bit open-minded about not keeping people in every case, but accepting that they're going to leave, but leaving in a very positive, trained, intelligent way, and eventually coming back as well, or being our ambassadors or acolytes in the world as well is something that's very important for Cleveland, I think. So there's 2 points on human capital there.
Can I just I think these are great comments, maybe just make 2 comments. First, if there's one metric that I think can correlate pretty, and I don't know if you've done this, so you'll probably say that I'm completely wrong, but and Emily used to work with Brookings, so then I'll understand where it came from. But last Thursday I was in San Francisco along Market Street in Mission Bay. If you want to see a city that is about to take off into the stratosphere, go to San Francisco. I've been going to San Francisco for 25 years. Market Street is going through an absolute transformation around the tech, social media, Twitter. I mean, this is the antithesis of Silicon Valley, right? And I think Silicon Valley will be highly disrupted very soon with more and more companies having at least portions of the company located back in the city. And then yesterday and the day before I was in Boston and Cambridge, so I spent my day in Kendall Square, around MIT, and then I went down to the Boston Innovation District along the waterfront, which in a very short period of time is seeing unbelievable growth around very disparate tech-oriented firms. Mass Challenge came in to provide startups with space and VC funding and all the rest of it. But what San Francisco and Boston have, obviously, is a starting point, not just of advanced research and entrepreneurial culture, they have density. So, the Detroit problem, which I think is sort of a Midwestern problem, is after deindustrialization, to a large extent because of race, large portions of the population and jobs dispersed across a very large landscape. In Detroit, only 7% of the jobs are within 3 miles of the central business district. Here, it's 15%. In Philadelphia, it's 15%. In Chicago, it's 20%. In Pittsburgh, it's 22% because of Oakland neighborhood. And then in New York City, it's 31%. When you have density of jobs, particularly within 3 miles of the CBD, those are certain kinds of jobs. A lot of things tend to happen from that. Retail and innovation and synergy, right? A lot of things tend to happen from that, which I think over time will happen in these places. But the numbers, the metrics are pretty severe, right? When you're talking about that kind of decentralization and dispersion. because there is an innovative economy out there in the Cleveland metropolis or in southeast Michigan, but it's very dispersed. So it doesn't have that kind of effect. And when workers go into their campuses, they're not walking the streets, spending their, I mean, you can just imagine all the radiating effects. The second thing, I think, is, money, capital, right? I was in Eindhoven, Holland, a couple months ago, and I had never heard of Eindhoven in my entire life, except when a Dutch gentleman joined the board of the Brookings Institution and our International Advisory Council. And after hearing me go on about technology and innovation, he just came up to me and said, it was like the scene in The Graduate, plastics, right? He said, go to Eindhoven. That was all he said. And then he walked away. So that really stuck with me because it was such a short comment. So I did go to Eindhoven, and what I found out was Eindhoven was the headquarters of Philips Lighting. And then they imploded in the late 1990s, and in 2 short years, in an economy of about 100,000 jobs or something, they lost 36,000 jobs. They had a minor disruption. To come back, what happened was instead of doing the typical kind of response, where you invest in the waterfront and they already bike already, they're Dutch, so they didn't need to do that. They invested in a series of funds for entrepreneurs, and they had a really interesting network of the remnants of Philips, their technical institute, which is one of the best in Europe, and then this high-tech campus that basically began to emerge off of private research money, not public research. But there was an enormous amount of flexible and patient capital to invest in entrepreneurs. So, my takeaway after going to Eindhoven, after having been almost hit by about 17 different cyclists one afternoon, very healthy people, was maybe what we should do in our great metropolitan areas like Cleveland and Detroit and Philadelphia, is from the different balance sheets and the different endowments to start basically just dedicating, 5%, 10% into some pooled funds, right, that would then begin to be invested into the next generation of companies and entrepreneurs off the base, the existing base of clusters and institutions that already exist anyway in these places. And so what would you get? 150 million, 250 million, 500 million, 750 million? I guarantee you a bunch of talented folks. Obviously, you're gonna have, you're not just gonna be financing everything here. But I guarantee you begin to do that, you begin to build the business incubators, you begin to build the collaborative space. A lot of talented workers will stay here because the quality of life is very high. I mean, for me, it's just Great Lakes Brewery. You had me at that. I mean, I could spend entire days, entire weeks, as you can imagine, at Great Lakes Brewery. I'd be very happy. But so there's something about this place that could be very addictive very, very fast, right? But you put, in addition to that kind of capital to invest back in your talent, something's gonna happen. And first of all, the Eindhoven effect is very real. They have been named by some reputable organizations the most innovative city in the world. And it's a remarkable story because they basically didn't zig like everyone else. They zagged in a major way. And within a very short period of time, they've doubled employment and they've become the innovative capital of Europe.
I was just going to add on to this because it relates to your question about keeping people here and entrepreneurial talent and flexible monies. I have a friend who runs a very good early stage investment company called First Round Capital. And there's a guy named Josh Koppelman. And Josh set up recently, so he decided actually to take his firm from the suburbs and bring it into West Philadelphia by the University of Pennsylvania. He was a Penn graduate. And Josh, said to himself, some of the best firms are growing out of dormitories, just like he built Half.com, which he sold to eBay and did very well, and a series of other companies Josh has done well. And so he set up a dormitory fund of flexible money. This is really true. And it's not, and he is now investing in startups that are coming out of Penn and Drexel and dormitories of kids that are doing this. And he thinks this is sort of a great idea. And it's not a lot of money, but he's putting it out, and he's got a whole system of sort of prizes for business prizes. And so you've got talented 19 and 20-year-olds who all of a sudden see their possibilities there. So great dormitory funds.
That's great. And I will say a number of the foundations and other institutions in Northeast Ohio have at times discussed, using their balance sheets to create pooled funds, and have done some work in that area. I think there's a lot more to be done, but it sounds like I hadn't thought of it in the dormitory setting. That's promising as well. There are a set of questions here that are, I think, related, and we have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to pull this together. And it also ties back to one of Jeremy's questions. And this is about sort of the balance of growth and opportunity, we'd call it. The What Matters to Metro report, Ziona can tell you, and has mentioned already, it's not just about jobs, it's about the kind of jobs, and it's about, longer-term economic prosperity is not just about having some high flyers and star researchers and home run entrepreneurial IPOs or whatever. It's about making sure that the economic opportunity is more broadly shared. Otherwise, even if you have these high flyers up here, they're dragging an anchor, that will never allow us to get past, to have any sort of sustained prosperity. And certainly in the center cities, Jeremy, you talked about the statistics in Cleveland. A lot of our work at our foundation is the city of Akron. We have similar challenges in the school systems and such. So I guess the question is, and several have asked it in these cards, what can you say about connecting some of these opportunities to the core cities, to historically disadvantaged populations, to people who are in generational poverty and seem to be stuck there? And related to that, one person mentioned this concept of the legislative officials and the dispersion of some of the political power toward the suburbs, and how you get kind of decisional power to focus on some of these core city issues. So I imagine all of you would have different angles on that one, but if you want to jump in at will, Ziona looks like she's ready to start.
I want to make 2 points. One is when a metro area builds entrepreneurship ecosystem, I think it's really important to have inclusion as part of its entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I know the fund and Jumpstart and other intermediaries are really working on ensuring that things really happen in the core city with minorities, women-owned, and others. So it's a really important point. The second one is we've been in the past 2.5 years assessing an initiative that's driven by Living Cities and Cleveland Foundation, and it's really a program in 5 different cities, but in Cleveland it's based on anchor-based economic development, and it's really working on how to use the economic power of anchors like Case Western, like UH, like the clinic, to build up the local economy. And they're talking about the city of Cleveland, but also the neighborhoods around University Circle. So you have the art museum, you have the big hospitals, you have the big university, and how do you take all their purchasing power and their hiring power and helping the communities that really surround them? So there are really initiatives of how to create pipelines to neighborhood residents to be able to really apply to entry-level jobs at the anchors. And also, how do you change the guidelines and internal policies of anchor institutions so they buy more from local vendors?
I think in the museum's case, our main change, we dramatically shifted in terms of our community outreach, whatever you want to call it. In the past, we've been frankly rather condescending. We sort of tell neighborhoods, particularly inner city neighborhoods, what they need, or we just send around sort of anonymous packages. But what we've done now is really create a task force, invite them in, get punched in the nose a few times, listen, take lots of notes, and then go out into their communities and really start to see what they want and begin to use our tremendous power and infrastructure to customize experiences for different audiences that they tell us that that's what our audience needs. So it's, in a way, it's getting into almost microeconomies, diversifying, breaking down all that we have to offer, but customizing it into different groups. And it's one of my major platforms. If I leave this place, one thing I want to have achieved will have been, that the surrounding neighborhoods of the museum outside of University Circle, Huff, and Fairfax will feel they're part of that community. So we're working extremely hard, but it means getting in there and listening, essentially.
I'll ask then, because I want to hear what Jeremy's response to this is. But so there's like really two different conversations going on in the United States that I think it would be helpful to join. One conversation is with companies, large companies, medium-sized companies, small companies, particularly in the STEM sector, or STEAM, put the arts in there as well, right? We can't find workers. We can't find workers with technical skills. We're not necessarily looking for people with four-year degrees or advanced degrees. We're looking for people who are either trained welders, trained electricians, the trades, what we used to call the trades, or people with computer science skills, right? Particularly that can be applied to multiple occupations and multiple sectors. And then the other part of the conversation is our failed school systems in the cities, which continue to basically try to replicate a model of teaching to test and teaching to get on a path to four-year degrees, because we're all convinced that that's really going to be the measure of a successful metropolis. I think we have to basically, for a portion of our students, and obviously we went through this battle several decades ago, it was called tracking, right? For a portion of our students, we have to, frankly, get them back on track to these technical skills, these technical trades. There are examples of places in inner city America where this works very, very well. The companies are basically in the schools. They're designing the curriculum. They're giving kids the apprenticeships, right? This is not a rocket science. It's what the Germans do with an economy that's 20% manufacturing and production. It's an export powerhouse of Europe. So, soon what we'll be putting out from Brookings, though I have to get it by all my colleagues, is to basically try to size the need for this in the United States, okay? Because what the US likes to have is, a challenge you can get your arms around. So how many of these places do we need? We need 1,000 career academies putting out 100 kids with credentials a year? Is that what we need? 100,000 a year? We can't do that? We could do that. Let's just, I think at some level, we've got to basically connect these two conversations about school dysfunction, which partly from my perspective, I went to the Brooklyn public schools, just counting the days to get out. It was like being in prison or something, chalk on the wall, right? When do I get out of this place, And this business conversation of we need a steady supply of skilled workers who really have these technical skills that we will help teach, right? This is the kind of matchmaking that we need to do, I think. And so let's do 5, let's do 10. Within 5 years, we'll start replicating this stuff. A couple of them will go bankrupt. They won't particularly, then we'll put them out of business. But it just seems like this should be a doable proposition, and we have models that work. And then that will relieve our inner city schools and our older suburban schools of of the entire challenge. We'll begin to sort of knock it down to perhaps where it might become more manageable. So Jeremy knows a lot more about this than I do in terms of the urban school systems. But this is sort of as a complete outsider trying to knit together two disparate conversations.
These are the kinds of questions I generally get fired over. So I was just going to say that. Just a couple points. I know we're at the end because it's such a huge, huge issue, right? So I'm, just as a background, I was a founding board member of the Mastery Charter Schools, which are a network of 15 inner city schools in Philadelphia, who, unlike other charters that are de novo, these do turnaround schools. So they take the existing schools, the worst performing schools, keep the kids, shift the management, have obviously more flexibility, and they've had really great results. It took Bruce to one, I think, but there are now 15 of these, and they've done some really remarkable things. So in the midst of that, of learning about that over the last 10, 12 years and helping to build this now 10,000 kids, I've spent lots of time understanding and coming to terms with how dysfunctional some of the institutions are that we generally viewed as the bridges to social mobility, and how there's a whole set of things that we've got to do, that we've got to come to terms with and be honest about, and there are no easy answers. And both, the right's got a set of easy answers around choice, and the left has a set of easy answers around money. And to be frank, both of those have got significant issues in them. But we have not, for the most part, actually come to terms with the complexity of this issue. So whether it's explaining to teachers' unions that the age when we can compete, when you can function as an industrial union versus being a craft union, that sort of favors performance over seniority, and what that looks like, and how you can protect your interests still within that. That's a big conversation. The fact that we've got to, I think in many ways, there's still this sense out there that you can not be in poverty, and something is going to save you from poverty if you have no workforce skills, very low workforce skills, and if you only have, with those low workforce skills, only have one adult income coming out of the household. I don't know how to do the math that makes that work. I mean, to be frank, the math doesn't work, right? So coming to terms with the reality of that, and having our on this issue, I feel a little bit, you remember that, since Bruce likes to use movie analogies, remember that movie where Jack Nicholson says, "The truth, you can't handle the truth," and goes nuts, right? So this is a little bit that issue, right? Which is we don't want to face. It's really difficult to face. And it's really difficult to face that within the context of the complexity of years of intergenerational poverty and what it's meant, and the really cultural complexities of that, how in fact it's possible to change that, but it's going to take sustained efforts that are not just about money, although money's always good. Camden School District gets $23,000 a kid, no outcomes. So it's not just about money. Mastery Charter Schools get about $12,000 a kid, outcomes are good. I can go to Camden and show you Catholic schools where they pay $1,500 tuition, spends about $7,500 a kid, same kids, same neighborhood, outcomes are much better. It is very complicated. And until we're willing to come to terms with that and talk about partisanship on this, right? I mean, the craziness on this issue. I mean, all of the cultural and political partisan dysfunctions of America come around human capital and come around that set of institutions which we all took for granted. I went to public schools in a city like Bruce, like many people here, and I took for granted, coming from a row home, not much money, a neighborhood in Philadelphia, I took for granted that that was a way to get to a next place. And to some extent it was. And we've got a lot of people that can't take that for granted at all. And in fact, the quality of that public good is so degraded that the level of, in many places, the level of violence is so problematic, and disorder. That if you go and you interview, as I have, hundreds and hundreds of parents, and say to them, why do you in Camden spend the $1,500, you can't afford it, to send your kid to a parochial school? Why are you choosing this charter, which, to be frank, their performance is not much, it's only marginally better or about the same as this district school? They'll say disorder, crime. They'll say that the inability to actually, at the point at which we don't have the ability to produce a public good, I'm using that in the economic sense, that has the value that someone can choose to stay there. I mean, it's close-up time, guys. I mean, that is a really difficult thing to sort of, to not be able to come to terms with that is a really, I mean, a terrible situation in the country. And I've just spent too much time in this, in the trenches of this. And I understand that that's only a piece, but it's a huge part of it. Yes, people want discrete technical skills, but of course, what they want are a set of foundational skills, both technical and social, so that you've got, in an economy that changes and churns and churns and churns, people have got the ability to go with those changes, and a set of institutions that will help us do that and will help people with those churns, because churn is the nature of, you know, what jobs are. It's only the city of Philadelphia that there's still a job description for a clerk typist, right? I mean, literally, by the way, literally, right? I mean, the rest of the world moved on, right? But clerk typist 1 and clerk typist 2, I'm sure, you know. But in the real world, right, these skills are transforming rapidly. So part of it is we have to come to terms with that, and we have to tell people the truth about it. To tell them the absolute truth. And there isn't some federal program that's going to change that. That's the nature of the damn economy. And you're not going to plan a different, that's the way firms, that's what firms do. I hear firms all the time who talk not about, and I know that there's a good number of competitive advantages to doing work here in different ways, but I hear firms all the time that where I have relationships with people don't talk anymore about being in another place because of the cost of labor, but because of the quality of labor. I hear it all the time. So they're making the choice not because of the cost of labor, but because of the quality of labor. And to some extent, in some situations, quality management. It's very, 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 become very, look, the Chinese, you know, miracle of manufacturing was not just cost. It was the ability to create these extraordinary flexible contract manufacturers that on a dime could make these, you know, do these really complex shifts and changes and make the work easier, right? You got it. So that's a big thing. We've got to come to terms with that. And if we can't come to terms with that, if we can't tell ourselves the truth, which is what was part of one Bruce's thing there, then I think we're going to have difficulty making the numbers in Cleveland and Baltimore and Philadelphia and Detroit and so many other places change. Not that I'm passionate about this issue, but I'm just saying. Oh, you better get me out of here now.
I can see that I've made a key strategic error to end on this note, but I do think we had a lot of resonance among all the panelists that the key issue in terms of growth and opportunity is education, and is really kind of sobering up and facing the realities and changing entirely the systems that are supposedly responding to these realities, because otherwise, you know, the definition of insanity, repeatedly doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. So I would say across the panel, other than our sort of depressing last question, which makes me want to go to Great Lakes Brewery, which is a good place to go.
That's why you have this great.
See, there you go. There's the silver lining. All the panelists, I took a million notes here and really got a lot of great ideas, but I think a huge theme that was pervasive in all of your remarks is this idea of behaving differently and being open to change. You know, David, out in the neighborhoods, actually finding what people want and responding to that and listening and changing the museum's behavior accordingly. We certainly heard it in terms of the job scenario and what we're seeing in the data and what matters to metros, that, you know, we've got to actually be very thoughtful and intentional about the kinds of jobs that we're creating and changing our behaviors to yield that result. And certainly I mean, Jeremy, you just gave us a great discussion on the education front in terms of the need for that. Bruce, the main theme I got from you, I loved your quote about the federal government, the prescription there, do less, better, which is, again, this idea of being willing to examine closely and honestly the behaviors that we've had historically, where they've put us today, and then being willing to experiment and try some new things and work in very different directions to get some of those results in your book. So thank you very much, everybody, for the inspired comments. I personally feel very energized by it. And Bruce, I would invite you to be an honorary citizen of Cleveland. You are ideal in that you like Great Lakes Brewery and you don't care about sports outcomes. So it's perfect. Go Tribe. Go Tribe.